Hey there, welcome to another First Look. Thanks for being here this week. This is another special week. I'm in Frick Park this week and I'm moving into the woods. See how it goes. So, this week you get to hear a new old voice or an old new voice or something. We're wrapping up this series on prophecy and poetry, but I will not be the one wrapping it up. Tyler Domsky, our current head of staff over there at Wexford and former associate pastor at Northmont, will be leading us in worship. And it's interesting and exciting. And, I've wondered often, can you imagine if you knew Tyler and you know me, what would it be like if he and I were on the same staff together in any capacity? Like, just think through that sort of for a second. Because I think it's kind of hilarious because he and I, of course, went to college together. He was a year ahead of me. We had a lot of the same friends and did a lot of the same things, and but had slightly different paths. He was in teaching and I was doing youth ministry, and then our worlds kind of converged here again over the last few years, and it's just nice to do that. But Tyler is always going to come at something a little bit differently than I would, which is exactly what I was hoping for, and I think will be exciting. So this week, as I said, he's going to be wrapping up the series, and he's going to hopefully, I think, use this text that we have to kind of give you a way of summary. And because this last text is about wisdom and understanding, and I think that is a nice intentional way of kind of wrapping up where we've been, to say, okay, we've talked about this now for as long as we have. What do we think about it, and where does it lead us? What do we do with all this information? And I've tried to, over the last 6 or 7 weeks or whatever it was, including the time that Ken Yost was preaching, I've tried to kind of give you a sense of what I hope is one kind of takeaway from all this. I think there's probably several kinds of takeaways, but I guess I was hoping that there would be at least one idea that one of the beauties, I think, of the metaphoric, symbolic, imagery-driven, maybe didn't literally happen like this aspect of Scripture, is that it allows what maybe didn't literally happen but always happens to speak directly into our experience and speak maybe even more truth to it than a literal circumstance could. And that we can spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out the facts and figures and literalism of everything. But if we don't understand the meaning of what happens, the importance of what happens to us, then every fact and figure in the world doesn't really matter. You can have, sometimes people give me some information about a diagnosis, like a medical diagnosis, and they say, oh, well, his sugar level or their sodium level or their blood pressure level was X over Y or Z or something like that. They give me some number. Well, I have absolutely no idea what that means. I have no ability to discern whether 7 is a good number, a bad number, or something in between. And then you need someone to interpret it for you. You need to understand the broader spectrum of, like, what that looks like and what that means. But art does that for us in a different type of way, or the the imagery that prophets and poets can give us, I think, give us that in a different type of way. It kind of allows us to reflect upon our own experience, knowing that no two experiences can ever be the same. It allows us to reflect on our experience. And I've been using this quote that I shared with Tyler, and I have no idea if he'll use it or not. The one about the artist processes something in public so that we can process our lived experience in private, which ultimately opens the artist up to critique and judgment, which I think we saw in spades especially with the prophets, that whenever you speak something, whenever you're willing and vulnerable enough to kind of speak into the human experience, that someone, of course, is going to critique your vantage point, either because it doesn't match up with their vantage point or their viewpoint, or it doesn't fully encapsulate all of what it means to be a person, or it's just offensive. I mean, not every viewpoint that we give is always supposed to evoke a positive emotion. Sometimes when we see art or hear a message, it's the opposite. We're not supposed to do that thing, or we're supposed to feel something negative, and that's part of the point. How do we process that emotion? What do we do whenever we are offended? What do we do whenever we feel, ostracized? Those are important things to understand how to handle as adults, as humans. And I think art can get at that in a unique way. So, with that as a lead up, let me give you the passage here for today. Now I just completely forgotten where it's from. Oh, yes, I do. Now I know. Now I remember. It's from 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 5 through 12. So here we go. Ready? At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon. This is all about Solomon. In a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." So this is as Solomon is about to become king over, the United Kingdom. We'll go over that in a second. And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in a place of my father David, although I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in." Not literally, but. "And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous that they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil, for who can govern this, your great people?" And it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and you have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you." It's not bad. It's better than a gift card. Solomon was not really supposed to be king. He was the one that David chose. There was someone else that I think, if I'm remembering right, I didn't do any research, but if I'm remembering my story right, there was someone else that David was supposed to choose and didn't, or could have chosen instead of Solomon and didn't. So Solomon was the pick and gets the throne, and I think the moment he takes office, the moment he takes the throne, there's contention. There's a kind of like, there's a real discernment from the beginning. And part of what you see in the beginning of his story is as David as David passes away and he becomes king, Solomon has this great responsibility because, of course, his father is the one who united the kingdoms in the first place. And nothing like this had ever been done. And, you could kind of think about David as like the founding father of this kingdom. And so Solomon had this responsibility of somehow trying to keep this together. Now, if you remember, part of what's really difficult about this whole process is not only because now the founder is gone, it was kind of like what would happen with the United States after George Washington becomes president. There was a fear that maybe all of this would fall apart, or maybe this wouldn't go very well. I think there were some, if I remember right, that wanted to think about making George king, just because that would kind of keep everything solidified, and he was a strong leader and that kind of thing. But that wasn't the experiment. That wasn't what was supposed to happen. And so enter John Adams. Well, Solomon has has a couple of things going against him. One, he wasn't supposed to be king, and so there were people in his family system who were not happy about the fact that this was true. But then also you got to remember the tribes, the 12 tribes that make up Israel are, even as a united kingdom, are still this kind of loose confederacy of groups. It's almost a little bit like, I don't know a whole lot about this, so I'm not going to pretend to. We have made nations of certain places in continents like Africa, and I'm not going to give a particular example because I'll screw it up. But some nations, even if the nation is, this country, is really made up of nations of individuals within that political boundary that really aren't the same. They're very much divided. There's these groups over here and these groups over here, and none of them like each other, and they haven't historically, and they really shouldn't have been made one nation. Like, no one thought to consider, who's making up this country? That's just not the way that the boundaries were drawn, or the reason why they were drawn. So you have these conflicts within nations due to the fact that no one really paid attention to who was making up these nations and how they were composed. Israel's a little bit like that, in that you had a group of tribes within the nation of Israel that were pro-Saul, and some that were pro-David. And so even when as David's becoming king, there's this whole fight about who would be king, and the fact that it was David who ended up being king. And you might remember some of the history of that. And there were a large group of people that sided with Saul, and a group of people that sided with David. David obviously ultimately becomes king. He chooses Solomon to become his successor, and then, you know, Solomon, fortunately, because I think of this moment with God, has the wisdom and discernment to be a unifying king. Unfortunately, what we see right after Solomon is that everything falls apart. David is strong, Solomon is wise, and then after that you have this sort of power grab that eventually, ruins everything. Ruins everything in the sense that soon after Solomon's life ends, the kingdom divides, and we have the northern kingdom, which is basically the group of tribes that sided with Saul, because the Saul supporters were still very much there and, you know, paying attention to what was happening politically. And then you had the David supporters. The David supporters become the south, become Judah, and the Saul supporters become the north, or Israel. That lasts for, let's say 200 years, just for the sake of argument. You get Elijah, you get Elisha, prophets like that. But then eventually the north gets taken into exile by Assyria, and the south gets taken into exile by Babylon. But for the moment, what we have here is Solomon being the person that he had to be. And I think he must have known that he couldn't be the kind of king that his father was. His father was the thing of legends. His father was the one they sang folk songs about. Saul will kill his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. So he couldn't be that. So he couldn't go down that path. He had to go his own path. And his own path included wisdom and discernment. And I think I've probably talked enough in the 5+ years that you've known me about the nature of wisdom. And the way I've always talked about it has been by saying that wisdom, the difference between wisdom and knowledge is about what you know, and wisdom is about your godly ability to use that knowledge to a good purpose. It's not just about using it well or using it to your advantage. That's not wisdom. That's a squirrel. That's not wisdom. Lots of people can take knowledge and use it to their own advantage, become rich or become powerful or whatever. But wisdom and understanding is about taking knowledge and using it for a godly use, a godly purpose, doing good with it. It's the transfer of that knowledge into something meaningful. And, well, there's an art to that. You know, think about all the people that you know who you would consider wise. They're not the people in your life that know the most amount of facts. Now, some of those people, some wise people, do know a lot of facts. They know a lot about history or science, and those are fantastic things to know, and they're helpful. They're a base. There's always some base of knowledge. You know, I can know a lot about the soil. I can know a lot about how things grow, but there's an art to growing things. You know, it's not a recipe. You have to be able to make adaptations. You have to be able to kind of read what is in front of you. And, you know, you can call that the Holy Spirit. You can call that, those kind of, what did Steph used to call them? Sneaky Jesus moments. You can call them whatever you'd like. But there are moments when we have to be able to kind of read the room. have a kind of emotional intelligence that allows us to understand how we use the information that we're given to good use. And I think that ministry and what we do, what I do, has a lot to that. Trying to understand, not only the fact that like I can look at the scriptures, I can look at the Bible, and I can tell you a lot of things about them, but if I can't find a way of saying them with a kind of something that has a kind of power to it, or imagination to it, or creativity to it, or connection, then it gets lost. Because you can't be wise on your own. You have to be interacting with something. You can be wise enough to make good choices, but those good choices always have some other counterpoint. I can be out here in the woods, and I can make wise choices about which direction to go, up that path or up that path. But I'm still going against something, right? Like nature is going to tell me if I've made the right choice or not. So there's always kind of an opponent to our discernment. But my enjoyment of this, like the reason that I walk whenever I do this, or the reason that I go into the woods to do this, is because I enjoy it. I'm taking something in. I'm growing my intelligence, not only of what's around me, but also of just the experience of life. And so I think that part of the reason I thought that talking about wisdom and understanding, to kind of wrap this up, is that we can look at something, we can look at a piece of art, we can look at we can hear a song, and we can break it down, or we can talk about every sort of element of what makes it important. I have people in my life who can talk to me about film. I have a friend who could talk about Citizen Kane until the cows came home, and the history of it, and the knowledge of it, and here's what happened, here's what was different, here's what made it genius, here's the new techniques that were used, and all of that is important. All of that is interesting, but it really doesn't mean as much unless you can either if you were there to experience it originally, where you saw that technique, you saw that thing happen that no one had ever done before. You saw a kind of filmmaking that was sort of rocked you, or you heard a story, or you experienced something that kind of like made you think about something in a completely different way. There's all sorts of examples like that about how art, or our expression of our faith, or our interpretation of scripture, can change the way that we understand ourselves. And that takes time. It takes time to kind of process that. And I think that some of the best sermons, or some of the best songs, or things that I've heard, are ones that you hear or read, or experience over and over again. It's like going to it's the reason why we like some of the hymns that we do, that we like. People like the hymns that they know because they've heard them over and over again. Now, some of that is just because we like things that make us feel comfortable, which is good. It's good to be comfortable. It's good to, to have that kind of level of like sanctuary and something you can rest in and something that you know what it's going to be like, But it's also because we've allowed that song to seep into our bones. That I told you my wife went to the Taylor Swift concert. Well, every single person at that concert, I saw videos of it, knew every single word of those songs. Now, they also liked it if Ms. Swift played a new song. But they loved screaming at the top of their lungs the songs that they had allowed to seep into their bones. And I think that's pretty cool. That art can become a part of us. And it can influence so much about the way we see the world, even though it didn't actually happen. And God is like that for me. God is literal to me. God is the essence of something that I spend my life trying to pursue. But there's so much to my experience of God that has a heck of a lot more to do with what I felt when I read something for the first time or saw something for the first time or, experience for the first time. That means a lot more to me than memorizing something or worrying about what to take literally and what to appreciate as figurative, as parabolic. Because if the truth of God is there, then everything else is a detail that can enrich my experience of God. And I think that there's a wisdom to trying to figure out what to do with that and how to make that feel special. There's some deer up here, and they are not sure what to do with me. That's fine. I'm not sure what to do with me either. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks for sharing your wisdom and discernment with me. Thanks for inviting Tyler back to Northmont. Thanks for being you. I hope this series has been good for you. Feel free to let me know what you thought or how I could improve it. But thanks for doing this. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time for another First Look. Take care.